to another episode of Higher Caliber. Today is our St. Patrick's Day special podcast. Today I am joined with J.R. John Reppenstein, Repp, Dustin Big Hoptry, Tim the Tool Man, Tim Senter, Mike Whiskey Mike Senter, and Big City Chris Boyd. All right, so it's St. Patrick's Day. Okay, I got some statistics here, all right?
Hope everybody brought their boots.
Yeah.
Army boots.
All right, thanks, guys. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
You like the intro?
It was okay.
It landed. It landed.
Okay. All right. Don't thank me yet.
All right, so I looked at some stats from it says 2022, but this is 2020. I looked at the key findings. So it says in 2020, there were 6,146 veteran suicide on average. That's 16.8 per day. In 2020, there were 343 fewer veteran suicides than 2019. The number of veteran suicides was lower than each prior year since 2006. 2018 to 20 age and sex adjusted. Sex adjusted. The rates fell by veterans by 9.7%. So it's saying that veteran suicides have gone down, but I also looked at the numbers from the time that me and John were in. They kicked out about 300,000 people. So there was actually less veterans anyway. So I don't really know what that means.
What do you mean they kicked him out?
Well, they didn't kick him out, but
downsized.
Yeah, they downsized. We got out early. I looked at my DD-214 the other day, and it even said for economic reasons, we got out a month or two earlier than we were supposed to.
It was part of there was a drawdown. I don't know what they called it, the sequester or something.
Yeah. Obama said there was too many. I think they started with combat arms or something. But basically, if you were already getting out, they were going to kick you out early, or if you were an E4 for 15 years, they were going to kick you out. They're kicking you out.
Instead of actually kicking people out, we were up for reenlistment. We signed a piece of paper saying that we weren't going to reenlist, and they move your ETS date up to 90 days. Yeah. So we just got out a little bit early, but then, they made it.
It was the best news ever.
Yes. And some people, they made I don't know what you call it, but you have to make a certain rank by a certain time. Otherwise you basically get dropped for, I don't know what you would call it, but if you don't make in X amount of years, if you don't make this rank, then they just say you're a shitbag. And
if you're just being a stale piece of crap, I guess, right?
Yeah.
The guy who got stop loss over here for 22 months is a little resentful.
Can you explain to us what stop loss means?
So there was a time in the history of the United States of America where the United States Congress, President, and Department of Defense had decided against all logic and common sense that they could keep a soldier in the military at least 2 years past the agreed upon date of their service contract in a time of war for definable reasons outside of the necessity of common sense. And you had no due recourse or regard or anything to do anything about it. They just kept you there and would send you overseas for a whole nother 18 to 20 month deployment, and then make you come home in PCS and go through that whole entire process. And then, just say la vie, enjoy your mandatory 2-year reenlistment that you didn't agree upon.
Don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way
out. It affected some of us mentally. So,
yeah. The thing I have noted is 22 veterans a day is not really an accurate, but the accurate thing. I think that was an average for 1 year, and that kind of stuck. I think everybody's heard of that now. 22 a day has been I think it's a non-profit, and people do 22 push-ups every day. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I've seen the viral videos.
Yeah. The other thing I have noted is firearms are involved 71% in veterans and 50% non-veterans. I guess at the time it seemed relevant, but now it seems kind of obvious. But the thing I wanted to get into that I thought was interesting to look at all these stats is you guys know what CTE is?
Yep.
Would you like to explain that for everybody?
Yeah, it's chronic traumatic encephalopathy.
Oh.
But I think everybody only gave a shit about it when it was like football players. And then
that was, what was his name?
Will Smith.
What?
Oh, I thought there was some Will Smith documentary about CTE that everybody.
There's
that was kind of what got people talking about it.
Right. Well, what's the football? I don't follow football enough, but there's a documentary.
Oh, Junior Seau.
No, well, it might be a guy. Hernandez.
Was it Aaron Hernandez?
Aaron Hernandez. So they had a whole documentary about him.
Guy.
Yeah.
So CTE can only be found during an autopsy, but it's like they can tell it's there from like a protein, I think it is, that's in your brain. Dude, it's supposed to be on air. No, it's supposed to be on airplane mode. But the thing I thought was interesting is like between PTSD and CTE, everything overlaps, or not everything, but I think like 9 out of 13 symptoms overlap.
Okay.
So they used to call it like punch drunk and boxers. I think it was like early as the 20s. This started coming out.
Shell shocked.
And that's another thing I have is, especially with PTSD people, they're like, oh, they're shell shocked or whatever. But they're kind of finding now that probably like a shit ton of them had CTE. So there's memory loss, difficulty thinking, impulsive behavior, aggression, depression, emotional instability, substance misuse, suicidal thoughts or behavior. So it's kind of, it's been like 5 years ago. They're like, hey, do you think the dudes who got blown up might have this? They're like, no, it's only from football and boxing. But it's crazy because you can get concussions from like skiing too hard. Like it doesn't have to be a direct impact. So, I just thought that was interesting.
I just pulled some up here. It says, I don't know how big their study was. This is Boston University said that 92% of ex-NFL players analyzed had CTE.
In an autopsy, right?
In an autopsy, yeah. I don't know, like I said, I don't know how big their study was, but I mean, that's almost all of them, I guess.
Right.
I think another thing that kind of goes shortchanged and brushed over by the public because most people don't exist in conditions like this is the long-term physical effects that the brain goes through during the process of enduring extended fight or flight situations or capacities for long periods of time. I mean, the human body is designed to withstand the capacitance of fight or flight for survival reasons, but you take soldiers or Marines or people who exist in that condition for extended periods of time, and they exist in hyperadrenergic states where their adrenaline is too high, their other stuff is too high for long periods of time. And there's a lot of underdeveloped studies for a lot of reasons that show the physical responses and damage that's actually caused to the brain and the body from existing in those states for long periods of time. It seems that nobody wants to take responsibility or acknowledgement of that. So that's another thing that gets brushed under the rug.
But how much of that do you really think really comes from, look at it this way, in a physiological sense, when someone is injured, their body has the ability to recover.
For sure.
How much of you, and we're talking about real mental illness or mental injury, how much of that in our society today has differed from our society of 100 years ago? If you look at all the men that came back from World War I, World War II, right? World War II, considered the great generation, right? I don't have their statistics on suicide or things like that, but their environment for healing was different, right? Mm-hmm. Because what did they have? They had a substantial belief in God. They had a substantial belief in their family, right? They had a welcoming environment home, unless we talk about Vietnam. And they had ability to heal. And a lot of what I see today is people don't have that ability to heal or that environment to heal because no one gives a shit.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody is very self-centered. It's all about me. What do I feel? And they don't really think about that family member, whether it be a brother, a father, an uncle, right? What they're going through, and are we limiting their ability to heal because as a society, we're not treating them like we should? I mean, honestly. I mean, think about all the guys that lost a limb during the Civil War, right? You get shot in the leg, the first thing you do, well, let's saw this off, right? How did they cope? How did they come back and farm? How did they come back and do the things that they needed to do and take care of a family, right? And today, right, whether it be in the military service, whether it be in fire and EMS, people have a shitty call or a shitty year, and it defines who they are, and they're unable to heal. And people say, well, we have a mental health crisis and we don't have enough mental health providers. And that's true. But why don't we have enough mental health providers? Because our society really has broken down, in my opinion, to the point that we don't have people in a family, in a community, that can actually care and love one another. Therefore, we have people that are just on their own and they cannot deal with it.
What was it like? I would say just subjectively that things are probably better with the stigma mental health wise, like in today's culture, like as we're actively working. But when you were coming through, what was it like as a medic when people were talking about did people even talk about PTSD, or is that something that just like PTSD, only soldiers, or it wasn't a term yet?
PTSD was not a term. I mean, here's the deal. If you went out on a call, right, and it was a complete tragedy, a complete disaster, but you came back into the station and your white uniform shirt had blood on it, you were a hero, right? And so people looked at that and they said, wow, he did a pretty good job. And over the years, as a senior medic, as a chief, there were lots of people, and I can think of a few locally, that I picked up off the ground who were crying and threw them into a wall and said, wake up. Life is not fair. You have plenty of people that help you. This happened to people because they were stupid, right? Now, in an EMS and fire situation, that's completely correct. In a military situation, that's not correct. And the reason it's not correct because your battle buddy or your partner couldn't help that he got shot because he was trying to do his job, right? Did he make a mistake? Maybe, maybe not. But at the end of the day, how do you deal with that? You don't deal with that on your own. If you had a good network of people that loved you, took care of you, and you yourself personally had a good belief system, you could recover from that, right? Because you had people to help you through it. Is it going to change? No, it's not going to change. But how you deal with it and how you move past it is you, right? So when I see people line up and they tell me, oh, well, there's not enough mental health capacity, I'm like, well, these people need to get a life, right? That's easy to say, but what they really need is a support system of a family, a personal belief system, in my opinion, of God, and a support system that will help love them and talk them through it instead of paying a counselor to tell them, well, you need to relax, right? There's strategies you need to work through, which those strategies are inherent to a family and they're not so inherent to just the person on their own because they're in crisis.
Yeah, but not everybody's that lucky. You could go back to a firehouse and everybody's a jar of mayonnaise, so they're not going to help you. So was there stress debriefing in the early 90s?
There was not stress debriefing in the early 90s. It really came about closer to 2000. Critical incident stress debriefing came around late 90s, early 2000s, and people started to talk about what people's problems were. But if you think about it, people dealt with it in other ways. So today we're dealing with it and we look at suicides, right? And we look at what are the basic needs of man, right? So in the 80s, in the early 90s, when a guy was stressed or a woman was stressed at the firehouse or EMS service, or even in the military, I saw it. who did they turn to? Their wives sometimes didn't do it, so they did, Maslow, the rules of what man needs or whatever. They turned to sex. They didn't turn to alcoholism. Well, they didn't. How many times
were you going to say they didn't turn to alcoholism?
No, they did.
Okay.
But they either turned to alcohol or they turned to sex. And how many times in my career, I've been in public safety for 39 years. And my two sons that went into public safety, what did I tell you? There's more that happens on the back of the tailboard of an engine that ever happens anywhere else. Right. So, and that's where all this happened. You find someone that you can communicate with that de-escalates the situation, but in turn, you reach out to that person and that turns to something completely different, right? Then, okay, I've got a counselor. No, I've got a girlfriend now, right? I've got a drinking buddy now. And that's exactly what it turned into.
I got a dog to kick now.
Well, dogs every once in a while need kicked, but
Dustin, I want to turn to you about you. You came in. I'm not saying you remind me of dog kicking.
I got to process that for a second.
Okay.
Yeah. Speaking of animal abuse, Dustin.
Yes. I kind of want to get your perspective about stigmas and had you even heard of what PTSD was? Because when we talked last time, you said you're in the delayed entry program in 2000, and then you went in after 9/11. So what was it like? Was that even a conversation while you were in? Because I'm sure when you got back, it was probably a conversation. But talking to your platoon or whatever, was that even?
It was not.
Okay.
However, I'm going to give a caveat to that. One of the things that Mike had mentioned was, not to get into the whole overall arching. Look, he's accurate in what he said, and it's applicable to your question to me. There is a total breakdown of societal values, belief structures, support systems, which affects a whole host of things, not just this. But one of the things that every person here who served in the military can attest, with all of the terrible things we can talk about in the military, is that if the military does provide for you one thing, it is a support system. It may not be the support system that you need, but it is a support system of brotherhood that you will have for the rest of your life, irregardless of the capacities in which you served or whatnot in those ways. And every one of us can attest for that. You two will be friends for life. And I didn't serve with John, but if John called me at 2 a.m. and asked me for help, I would be there to help John. And I'm very certain that he would probably provide the same access for me as well. And I just know that because we are of the same thing. We are that brotherhood. So you have that support system, but no, there wasn't a talk or a focus on mental health. There wasn't that. There was everything was very single-minded, goal-oriented, focused forward towards mission access, mission assessment. Here's what we're going to do. Training for that function, getting all that equipment there, getting the troops there, getting, everything there to perform that function. And everything was so aggressively single-minded towards that goal. There wasn't room for lunch, let alone room for discussion of future mental health issues or having healthy access to things that would, prevent or at least reduce the likelihood of developing those things. Everything was just very mission, core, goal oriented. And I'm sure everybody here in EMS and fire and in military goes through seasons where you're developing into whatever that process is, where that's you prioritize the mission over self. Not that that's a core value of the military or anything. I'm not trying to describe anything inappropriately, but the byproduct of that process is that takes place. It's over. So there was not a big discussion about mental health. Now later in later serving years, the military did start developing some mechanisms for assessing mental health issues that I saw precipitated with some people. There were some evaluating physician doctors that were traveling around in theater that you could have access to if you requested them through your aid teams or medics or stuff like that. And you could.
Well, was that like a pride thing? Like Hoptry is talking to those people.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. There was an internal stigma that I think everybody at this table can understand, where if you did that, you were the broken clock. You were the broken weapon, if you will. Now the difference, I want to draw this a very clear distinction, was a lot of people may have misinterpreted that as abandoning your core group, your platoon, your squad, or your team. Now, if you would have went to one of your battle buddies or one of your homies that you served with, you could have poured your heart out to them and they would have had your back and you would not have had that stigma. But saying I need to leave to get help was often stigmatized as you're abandoning the family. We're supposed to suffer together. That's what our bond is. And you're leaving us. So there was that stigma attached to it. Yeah.
So if I can add to that, one of the great things that I thought happened in the late 90s, early 2000s, when it came to fire and EMS, which I know we're all a part of, is we didn't single anybody out. And what it became to be is if there was a terrible incident, right, where people died, where crews tried their best and couldn't do anything, nobody was singled out. What happened was the entire team was brought in at once to talk, right? And that was a big improvement because everybody could hear what everybody else had to say. And when the first person started to talk, and I've been through several of these, when the first person started to talk, the emotions started to flow. And when that happened, everybody could relate to that individual and they were not ostracized based on the fact that they had something to say, right? And it really was a good thing. So I really think in public safety, bringing the entire team in. Now, I know if you're involved in a large scale incident like in the military, bringing a brigade in might not be the best thing to do, but bringing a company in might be the best thing to do. But in fire and EMS, bringing the whole firehouse in or the whole EMS station, that was truly a benefit, I think, and really a blessing to help people just open up their feelings.
Yeah. From my perspective, and the reason I wanted Dustin to talk about his stuff first is by the time you guys had already done the invasion, I'd already seen Hurt Locker.
The most accurate movie ever made. Yeah.
So, I guess by the time I was in high school, there was already a million movies about Iraq vets that were losing their shit. All right. So by the time me and John got in, I don't want to say there was like mental health gatekeeping, because that's not the right term, but it was like most of our senior leadership was like during the invasion and stuff like that. They were in Fallujah, and it's like, oh, you're right. I don't have real PTSD because I didn't go to fucking Iraq. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. It was, or on the other side, you have these people that don't want to be in the Army. So they're in, what was it called when they were in the mental, whatever. I can't remember.
Like the hospital?
Yeah, they were in the hospital.
They had a name for it.
Because there was dirt bags that would be like, I got PTSD from basic training, and they wouldn't be with the platoon, and they'd be there. So we're like, yeah, that's completely fake. So you don't know what's, if people are actually going through it or not. So it's kind of, there's always that.
You're always going to have people that cheat the system, so to speak.
Yeah. So it's kind of
like,
it was almost
Me Too, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like the Me Too movement.
# pound me too.
That's the only letter I have to hold up. I'm sorry.
But it was definitely one of those things where you're like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So, or somebody who, like,
did you feel like you might, like you were going to be a PTSD imposter?
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
You know what I mean?
John, I don't know if you felt that way, but it was
like
something where, or you're like, well, it can't be this. Whatever I did wasn't that bad.
Wasn't as bad as what they did.
All right.
You know,
let me throw just a different angle of consideration here, because I want. It's really easy to paint a lot of well-intentioned leaders in the military with a bad paintbrush, but I want to give an example of someone who came just before you and an expectation of that leadership, which really made it difficult to lead your generation coming up underneath of us. When I came up, platoons were so transitory. So many people were in and out. So many people went on that first deployment, that second deployment, and they said, "The hell with this! I'm done. I'm out. And so you became a leader that lost in many situations. You lost all your peers. You lost all of your subordinates. That you lost so many people that you trained. You train a squad. You train another squad. You train another squad. You might even train a whole platoon. You fill in as a squad leader. You fill in as a platoon sergeant. You do all these things, and then your people get taken from you. You move, and then you finally get into this mental space where you just want your people by any means necessary to stay put so you can build a solid family. You can train a family. You can build a core of functioning core team or squad around your leadership methods. And I have witnessed, with the best of intentions, squad leaders and PLs and platoon sergeants in that capacity try to hinder people from potentially, and this is where some of that accidental stigma comes in. I really don't think those people meant that, but they try to stop people from leaving the platoon or getting access to stuff because they want to keep their family together. It's like the old toxic mother theory from Freud, if you will. It keeps the child from developing or getting help because you want to keep them in the family. And I think honestly, there's a lot more of that in the military. Like I want to keep John in my team. I just got this kid. He's my 240 gunner. I want to keep him here. He's a beast, but he's struggling with some stuff. I don't want you to leave. I like this kid. And I unintentionally hinder him from getting the access and the help that he needs because I want to keep him in my squad. I think there's a lot more of that in the military, at least during my time, than there was of, "Oh, John, you little bitch. I'm not gonna make sure you get what you need." I think there's a lot more of that.
I think a big part of it is, and I'm going to relate some of this to the fire service because we're all in the fire, or at some point we're in the fire service. Like, I think a lot of it is we just don't do ourselves any favors. It's easy. So Jerrod was talking about, because we were in at the same time, almost exactly, like start date to end date was almost exactly the same. And there was, I guess, the start of the mental health push, but from what I remember, it wasn't, I don't know how to describe it. I could tell you this. My first sergeant that I had, who Jerrod knows who he is. I won't name drop him on here, but we name dropped him like 4 episodes ago. To this day, codename Lonnie. This guy was not born. He was made in a lab. And like, you would get up at 4:00 in the morning and this guy's on his second pot of coffee. And he, despite what I'm about to say, I still kind of look up to this guy. Like, he was a very positive role model. He also came up in a different time. Like, his first platoon sergeant was a Vietnam vet. Like, that was the era that he came up in, was his leadership served in Vietnam. But I remember him saying, because they had billboards on posts that were like, seeking help is a sign of strength and all that. And he said something along the lines of, if you kill yourself, I'll tell your family that I'm sorry, and they might even believe me. Jesus. But that was just how it was. And that was how he thought about it. He was just a different cat. But so there was this push for mental health, but it wasn't like everybody talks about, the kinder, gentler army. And I think that's something that people have been talking about since the beginning of time. Is
George Bush the first.
It's so much softer now than it was back then.
Yeah, every generation before you is going to be.
Right. But there was a push for mental health, but it wasn't, in my experience, it wasn't. You weren't encouraged. You certainly were not encouraged.
It seemed about this. It seemed about the same as going to sick call for lower back pain,
or for literally anything. but going to sick call for literally anything.
Right.
But John, to me in the military, mental health professionals, what do they really know? right? And if you think about it, I mean, the mental health professionals today, and I'm going to relate this back to the, I'm going to open up a whole can of worms, the Catholic Church, right?
Oh, buddy.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
You have celibate priests who are trying to give you advice on marriage. How do they relate to that? And how do your therapists that were actually assigned to you, I mean, honestly, relate to a combat experience if they were never in combat arms, right? I mean, they can read about it, but they've never had the emotional, the adrenaline rush. They've never had the emotional letdown of losing a close friend. And they've never really felt scared, right? Because when you're under fire, that's got to be scary, right? And how do they know that? They don't. They don't. And they're trying to give you principles based on what somebody else wrote that they really don't feel. And how do you really attach yourself to someone? How do you really attain what they're psychologically feeling if you've never felt it?
Are you talking about giving them the "you weren't there, man" speech?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. You know, as a firefighter medic, if someone told me like, well, I understand that a baby burned up in a fire and I understand it's bad, but you need to move past that. You didn't hold that dying child.
But what if they had a thin red line decal sticker?
Well, that's not true. I mean, you know, as a medic, as a firefighter, I will tell you, I've held people on their last day, their worst day, and their first day, right? I have. And their first day, when it was their last day, it was tragic. It was tragic. And I've had people that have looked at me in their last seconds of life, right, and tell me, help me. Just help me. And I knew that I have done everything I could do. I've given every drug in my drug box. And the only thing left to do was to hold their hand and pray. That was it. And some psychologists can't tell you how you should feel out of a battle zone, let alone the back of a truck or a bus in a squad. When you're about to lose somebody, or you did lose somebody, because they can't even possibly know how you feel. They just can't.
So if you guys don't know this about me, you're going to learn real quick. I'm a bit of a contrarian. Like, I push back. So I'm about to push back on you. And this ties in with what I was saying about us not doing ourselves any favors. And this also, so I don't misspeak, this is all my own experience, my own perspective. I can't speak for anybody else. But part of the problem when I say that we don't do ourselves any favors, I think this is maybe an example of us not doing ourselves any favors. And what I mean by that is, well, first off, I don't think a therapist worth their salt would ever tell you how you should feel about something. I'm not saying, like, I don't know that much about psychology, psychiatry, therapy, but I think it's more of helping you process and kind of come to terms with it on your own terms, rather than saying, like, you need to feel X, Y, and Z. That's one thing. Another thing is, I think a big problem that people have is, and this is fire, probably first responder and EMS, fire, EMS, military, and I'm sure other people too, but thinking and feeling, well, you don't know, like, how I just had a conversation with a good friend of mine who's also an OEF vet. Actually, he might be OIF, OEF, but he was kind of saying but exactly what you're saying. He said, how can I pour my heart out to somebody who's never experienced what I've experienced and they can't relate to me? And what I would say to that is, well, they're the subject matter expert in their field, and people experience all kinds of horrible things, not just first responders and military. I mean, people are victims of heinous crimes. Terrible shit happens to people. I don't think that they have to experience all of those things. You know, think about people with schizophrenia. You could say the same thing for them. It's like, well, how could somebody help them if they haven't experienced what they're experiencing? It's like, well, you have somebody who deals with this professionally, and a lot of it is theory, but also the scientific process of figuring out best practices.
Yeah, and it's hard to be a counselor when you have schizophrenia.
So, and I get that too. I kind of get that, what Repp is saying, because let's go back here. All right.
Okay, because I'm about to raise your bet.
Well, let's go back. Let's go back.
It's healthy dialogue.
And it has nothing to do with being
Mike's about to flip this fucking table.
Well, here's the thing though. So I can agree with what you're saying, but I also agree with what John's saying in the fact that, so you're a paramedic, right? You've never had an MI or a stroke, but you know the best way to treat that, right?
Right, but I do not know what it feels like to rehabilitate from it.
Sure. So, but you've been taught the best plan of action, or the best way to go about handling that crisis, right?
To alleviate and address the acute symptoms. Now, so if we're playing poker, I'm going to meet you and I'm going to raise your bet and your bet. And what I would tell you is this: it's no different in fire and EMS than it is in the military. It's no different than when I had people in the Navy who told me they experienced a tough thing, or they didn't like something, or as my son that came home from the Army. If there is love and there is a time when they can be listened to, and they don't need an answer per se. They don't need a strategy. They don't need examples of what to do to make them feel better. They just need accepted. And I really think that inherently goes through on, and that's the problem with our society today, that people are not accepted for what they experience and what they feel.
I know Dustin wants to jump in, but I just want to respond. I do agree with what you're saying. I just think that they're not mutually exclusive. And I think part of that is, so I think there's part of it is getting professional help if you need it or if you think you need it. And I do think the other part is a support system that could be your family or a trusted friend, but also just people that have been through the same thing as you. Like, I went through the IAFF's peer support training, and that's the kind of mission, as I understand it, of peer support, is to be the bridge between professional help and just needing to talk to somebody. And I'll just share what my experience has been in therapy. There are different styles of therapy. And also I'm pretty open about the fact that I see a therapist, and I have for several years. And one reason why I don't know, sometimes I worry about coming off like I'm trying to brag about it when I'm actually not. I want it to be more normal. And I think there is this big shift that's happening, like this shift in pop culture of where it's like being more accepted. I think, like, you hear you listen to podcasts and there's all these advertisements for BetterHelp and people talking about their own experiences in therapy. But my experience has been, I meet with my therapist, I ramble for an hour, and usually that's about it. And
is it therapeutic?
Sometimes. So I stopped. I stopped for a little while because I didn't feel like I was having a great benefit. And then I decided to start going back. And I don't see from week to week any difference, but over the course of time, I see a huge difference. And basically what it is I basically talk to the wall for an hour, and like there's a back and forth, but I talk to my therapist. He doesn't say much. And it's kind of like stream of consciousness almost. I'm just talking about this, that, and the other. And then every now and then he just goes, yeah, what's that about? And I'm like, what is that about?
So John, don't you feel, I've known you for several years. If no one's ever told you you're a hero, you served your country, you excelled above all, you came home, isn't that enough?
No.
Doesn't that put that into perspective for you?
I would say if that was enough, then people wouldn't be killing themselves.
But those people don't have the support system. If you look at you had a family, you had a family-run business. They accepted you back. They praised you for what you did. They love you. That's enough.
I want to throw something in on that. Okay, I'm no better or worse than anybody. I'm a dirtbag like anybody else. But I want to throw a concept, a thinking construct in here, because both of you, in an abstract sense, are correct. Okay, the issue here, and I'm going to suppose a question to Christopher here in a second. The issue here is not that John has a support system. We all have a support system, but like anything that requires maintenance, which mental health does, a support system isn't always the solution to that. Support system won't change your oil in your truck or put food on your table, or
unless you're Tim Center. I've changed his oil.
Yeah, it's your Tim Center. I
taught him how to change oil, by the way.
I've helped him. There's a rooted cancer in my humble dirtbag opinion in the entire construct from the top. You can podcast, you can Google, you can YouTube, you can whatever subscribe any knowledge or access or information or somebody's opinion about mental health, and you'll see everybody make an argument from the bottom, from their core support structures. From in the military, my platoon didn't provide me enough support access. My family didn't support me enough. My place of work didn't support me enough. My wife didn't support me enough. I would like to suppose the construct that everybody seems to avoid, and that the cancer and the mental health process is really at the top. And it's the intent and design of mental health compliance, and mental health function as an industry in the United States of America, because it's very different outside of the United States of America. And I know that because I've had access to it outside of the USA, and I've had access to it inside of the United States of America. I have a question for Chris. Chris is a very analytical thinker, so I want to pick his brain about this. If I were to suppose to you, what would your opinion be if I told you that the root of the purpose of the mental health industry as a whole, not the small cottage industry, not the person who goes to college to help people, who has a heart for humans and wants to help them, but the root cause and development of the mental health industry as a whole is to reduce liability, because liability is a cost. It's a cost on industry. It's a cost on your company. It's a cost that the Department of Defense bears after soldiers separate from military service. It's a cost that the IAFF bears when firefighters separate. It's a cost that insurance companies bear when firefighters separate or continue to work in their industries. What if the reason the entire mental health industry as a whole is failing is because the root of it at its whole is to reduce liability, but not in fact help people, reduce the end user cost on the overarching industry that person works for, is employed for, or is a part of? What is your take on that concept?
That is a long question.
It is. You break that apart as you need to.
I don't feel super qualified to answer. I mean, I
wasn't qualified to ask it.
All these guys,
give it your best shot.
Heroic military stories, and I'm like, I don't have any of these things. I guess in my experience, I don't have any real experience with any kind of mental health issues that I have seen or really been around. Like you guys, I don't really have a whole lot of time, I guess, in this field. I was never in the military. I've only been in fire and EMS for
I just want to take a second to tell you this. You're surrounded by mental health issues all day, and I have witnessed personally your positive outlook on life and your highly motivated attitude actually increase the benefit of other people's negative, myself included. I've actually personally walked out of a Chiefs meeting pissed off, walked by you, had a short conversation with you, and you cheered me up, but I went home, was kind to my wife. Thank you for that. Thank you for that gift you gave me. I want to say that to you. So you have had exposure to that. You're just so nice, you probably don't realize it.
Yeah, I feel like that could be a part of it. I feel like there's probably a lot of issues that kind of get put on the back burner because people just don't want to deal with the consequences of what's going on with all the people that work for them. They kind of just rather put it out of sight, out of mind, and rather than actually sit down and try to come up with any solution to an actual problem that's going on. Well, it's more than just mental health. There's probably a lot of situations that go on in our field and in the military and fire and EMS and probably law enforcement as well, that stuff just gets kind of shoved under the rug and put out of sight and just thrown away because they'd rather just not deal with it and put the burden on somebody else rather than face the challenges of actually coming up with any kind of solution.
Personal responsibility, not just for your own thoughts and actions, is a big thing, but also, you know, the benefit of obviously coming up around a good nuclear family support system. Everybody in this peer group is blessed to have I know that I can knock on any door sitting at this table with a problem, and somebody here it may not be a perfect solution, but somebody here will offer me a solution and help.
There's always meatloaf, Dustin.
Right. There's always meatloaf, but for the perverse, for the person with no father, for the daughter with no mother, for the soldier with no family to come home to, for the EMT who has been left and has no child, no husband or wife or support system.
Yeah, I mean, look at these EMS calls that we run into. We run into shit houses.
No support system is an option.
We don't go to Mike Center's house 90% of the time.
But the problem is that most people don't understand. And here's the crux of the problem.
Right.
And what it all falls down to. Most people don't understand that life isn't fair.
Well, that's true.
And until you understand that my life is not fair. And the only way it's going to become fair is if I take personal responsibility and make it better.
Yeah, and that's something I want to segue into about personal responsibility. But my take on this whole thing, it's kind of like when these people out here say, I want a concealed carry teacher that's been in a firefight before. And you're like, shut the fuck up. Right.
People say that. Is that
a thing?
Yeah, all the time.
That's a thing.
Yeah, here's the thing. Well, just any teacher, right? Most boxing coaches aren't good boxers, right? They're mediocre, but they can relay the information better. Just because you're really good at something or you've been through something, but you can't articulate that to somebody,
right,
doesn't always make the best person to dump all your shit onto, because they can't, like John was saying, like, so the perfect scenario is somebody who's been through it, but kind of how we're having this dialogue right now, talking out loud is usually the best way to figure things out. Right. So
for sure,
I'd much rather people talk to somebody that understands, or at least can put it in a box, like, okay, You're going through this. Because most of therapy is, like what John said, is people just talking and then somebody going, well, have you thought deeper about that?
Right.
And then them talking out loud.
Read this book, please.
Right.
That's it. Yeah.
Right.
I've got a book. It's called Shenanigans.
Right.
Anyway.
We're going to take a pee break. And we're back. All right, John, go ahead.
I just wanted to finish the thought that I started earlier. About talking to a professional. I've done a little bit of research on this after the conversation I had with my one friend who wanted to talk to somebody who had similar experience to him. And the answer that I've got is that part of the dysfunction of PTSD is not being able to have relationships with people who you see as not having that shared experience. So it could be more beneficial for somebody to have that relationship with a therapist that didn't have that experience, as opposed to trying to like alienate yourself and say, I'm only going to talk to somebody who's been through this. And that also comes with that was, I think, what I meant when I originally said sometimes we can't get out of our own way, or we're not doing ourselves any favors. Is just kind of coming up with excuses to not do something instead of having an excuse to just do it. And also, we all have known or know people who are struggling or were struggling. And sometimes you just don't know how, like you might want to help and you just don't know how. So how do you start the conversation, right?
Right.
I mean, I know all of us know and have worked with people who we're kind of like, this guy's got something going on and we don't know what it is, but nobody wants to be the one to bring it up.
Sure.
So figuring out how, and it's uncomfortable.
Sure, definitely.
So now that we've talked about all the depressing stuff, let's talk about advice to people on getting through this stuff.
Booze, drugs, hookers.
All of the common things, you know. And I want to throw this before we kind of shift into that gear. I kind of want to. I heard something the other day that kind of turned a light bulb on for me, anyway. And I think I was watching a video of a podcast or something, and they basically said that first responders have a higher instance or higher probability of PTSD and all the things that go along with them than the military, because they're exposed so much more and for a longer period of time. So
25 year to 30 year
so
career.
In the military, you go and you fight. You're in the military. So, I mean, some people have careers in the military, but I would say a good fair amount are in the military for 4 years?
3 to 5 years, 3 to 6.
You're right. So an EMS, fire, whatever, you're there for 30 years.
So what's your
25, 30 years. So not that you're fighting every day, but if you think about it, if you're in the military, say you go to war, right? And you had your traumatic experiences and then you're done. Then you start recouping, right? People in fire and EMS, that's their job, right? Not that they see the crazy shit every day, but just that buildup of, every so often they're getting that trauma or whatever is affecting them. They don't really get to heal.
Can you define the term burnout for me or for everybody listening?
Well, I want to throw something onto what Tim just said, because I think what Tim said is super accurate, first of all.
Yeah.
But a parallel between the military versus EMS and fire, this is another thing people don't think about. I know in the past, other people have experienced coming home and people calling them every name in the book or dirtbags, this, that, and the other thing, or people who, in very minor situations, I would not consider anything recordable. People disagreed with my participation in the military, but nothing crazy. I never came home and got called a baby killer or any stuff like that. That never happened to me. I know it happened to previous generations. I feel for those people, but another big difference with mental health is that, yes, you may have to deal with death and carnage in the military on a just a horrendous capacity, but you at least know that the vast majority of people support you, have your back, this, that, and the other thing. I don't think a week has gone by in EMS and fire, and I'm always careful not to subjugate my industry to a negative connotation, because I love it. It's the best thing on earth. But I don't think a week has gone by in EMS and fire without someone calling me a piece of shit. And I want to be completely accurate with that.
Is that because you're a fire chief?
It could be. There could be so many capacities, ranging from being terrible at my job to actually being a POS. But it is EMS and fire, in my personal experience doing both, keeps you more humble. People will humble you. You guys all know this in this industry. Right. And look, in the military, you get up on the mountain. They let you get up on that mountain. You live there. You live in a culture of that keeps you high, feeling good.
Hypothetical mountain.
Yeah. You get up on a hypothetical mountain.
You're in a vacuum.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. John put it a great way. You're in a cultural vacuum and you live up there and you feel high, but you get on the bus at work and the ambulance at work and
the meat wagon.
Yeah.
The Band-Aid box.
You get on the Band-Aid box at work and you go out and that, 92-year-old Esther is unbelievably happy to see you. And then not 40 minutes later, you go run on the next Karen who signs your paycheck, you dirtbag piece of garbage, blah, blah. So you can't stay in that mentality. And then you go home and you live a regular life or your wife humbles you because that's what wives do. And then, life humbles you and you don't get to live in that. So I think that's a huge reason why PTSD is more prevalent, but also ignored more in the EMS and fire industry, because you don't have that opportunity to feel like to just be consumed by that hero mentality that you have in the military. EMS keeps you humble. It puts your feet on the ground, and sometimes it puts your head underground every day. You got to live with it. The peer support group and the home structure has always been a huge, important part of EMS and fire. I remember in the last podcast, one of the things that we talked about, Tim brought this up, was how the firehouse table was falling apart, to borrow a phrase, and this is one of those aspects.
Tim, so I asked what your definition of burnout was. We're going to start moving into. Okay, so giving somebody advice, right? How long have you been doing this?
Professionally?
Yeah.
About 15 years.
How about semi-professionally?
Yeah.
Closer to 20.
Okay, so.
Maybe.
He was my protege.
Maybe not. I'm only 35, so.
Burnouts.
I got into it young.
Burnout's a very subjective term.
Sure.
But I think with fire and EMS or anything, you're kind of like, well, PTSD didn't get me. And then you're like, I got 20 years left.
Not today.
Right.
So, what would you say burnout? I mean, for people who've never heard the term, we hear it all the time and it's usually taken out of context.
And just sitting here thinking about that, I don't know if you coincide burnout with somebody that has PTSD, because I think a lot of the things are the same. I don't know why somebody's truly burnt out. Maybe they are suffering from traumatic events and they don't really know how to deal with it. Because a lot of the symptoms of PTSD kind of coincide with somebody that you would think would be burnout. Somebody that's just angry.
Memory loss, problems with planning, organization, carrying out tasks, impulsive behavior, aggression, emotional instability. I guess they just call that the salty paramedic.
Yeah. You would say, hey, that old guy just burned out.
But what advice would you give somebody? Because I feel like I think with most of this stuff, it's delayed. So I was talking to John off microphone about, and it's kind of what Dustin said, or somebody brought it up, where you're like, hey, when I'm finally done with this, or what did I say? When I get home, I don't care what happens. When I get home, I don't have to go to PT. I don't have to wake up at 5 a.m. and go to PT. I'm done. So what I think the problem is with at least with most veterans, is you get home and there's nothing to do. You enjoy it for a little while, but there's no structure whatsoever.
Right.
And that buddy that you had, I can't go to Repp's barracks room anymore and have a beer with them or whatever.
Right.
So,
there's a loss of identity too.
A loss of identity. And
sure.
You get back to your neighborhood or your town and there's nothing going on. Your neighbors aren't going to come over and have a beer with you. So you have a beer by yourself, and then you have 10 beers by yourself.
Right. And
then that's just what you do. And then and then 2 years later, you're calling your friends going, dude, I'm fucked up. I don't know what's going on. So I think with fire and EMS, you're like, I got 3 years in. I haven't kicked my dog or beat my wife. Like I'm fine. I think I'm fine.
Right.
And then slowly but surely you start realizing like it's okay. this sucks. And I got 20 more years of this going on.
Well, and, kind of back to what Chris said when he said that he doesn't think that he has experienced, the PTSD things or whatever.
You could be going through it right now.
Exact. So I've been in it for a little while. I've been working for a busy department. It took me a while to realize that I have experienced traumatic incidents and they did affect me. You know what I mean? Right. So my trigger, so to speak, I was fine until I had kids.
Yeah, that's a big one.
And then right after my first kid was born, I had anxiety from 0 to 10.
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about that too. So would you mind sharing your
no
anxiety experience?
So, and I tell everybody this, but I've always been a worrier. I can always remember growing up, I would always be worried about things, right? Not that it was debilitating, but I was always worried about things. But like I said, it didn't hit me until I had kids. And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking about the worst things in the world. Not necessarily all the calls I've been on, but maybe a little bit. But
the fragility of life.
Exactly. How fragile it is. Mm-hmm. And you don't want your family or your kids in those situations, And I had been in professionally in fire and EMS for a little while before I had kids. I think, I started when I was 19. How old was I when I had kids? It had been a few years, and then it was weird. It was nothing happened or anything. And just one morning I woke up and it was like always on my mind. And then I started having, I wouldn't say for me, I would say it was full blown anxiety attacks, but not for maybe somebody else that just totally shuts down.
But you didn't know what they were at the time, right?
No, sometimes I thought I was fucking dying. I mean,
it also sounds like you're using someone else's definition of an anxiety, like a panic attack,
Sure,
exactly.
You're not having what your preconceived notion of a panic attack is.
Having a Hollywood panic attack.
Exactly. I was having my own panic attack. What was, I guess, normal for me now, because I think we all experience things differently and live through things differently. But, I was having those, and the whole mental health thing at the time when I started fire and EMS was taboo. You didn't talk about that shit, right? And I finally, after dealing with this for a few years, I got to the point that I was tired of feeling like shit, so to speak. Like I could still go to work. I didn't miss work. I wasn't a full blown alcoholic, but I still felt like shit. And I decided to go to the doctor and try to seek help for it. And at that time I didn't really put it all together. I knew I was having basically panic attacks, but I didn't really know why. You know what I mean? I wasn't putting all the pieces together. So I went to the doctor, and that was honestly the best thing I did. And it was still weird. My first visit, it was total freaking taboo. Like, you don't want to tell these people, you don't want to tell your primary doctor that you're having anxiety, right?
Wasn't some of the big symptoms like you thought you were having a heart attack?
Yeah, like chest pain, just like fatigue. My mind wouldn't shut off. Like I would have kind of insomnia, like trouble sleeping, stuff like that.
But it wasn't the Hollywood, like you were having a flashback of a call.
No,
and just like,
I wasn't having a flashback of a call. It was just it was just there. You know what I mean? And
I want to talk about the rooted strength and what Tim said there.
Go ahead.
And Tim's very excited. First of all, first and foremost, mental health. Mental health is like a check engine light in any mechanism, and it needs maintenance. Okay. And to say it needs to be ignored is just as ignorant as ignoring any other check engine light in your automobile or mechanism that you need to function or maintenance. It takes a lot of strength these days. It shouldn't, but it takes a lot of strength and wisdom to admit any mental health issue. I want to say that I'm proud to be friends with a person who admit that they went through a struggle. Every person at this table, myself included, has gone through struggles, and the capacitance required to seek help is often very difficult, especially in our industry. And to hear the example of somebody who went through that function is very encouraging. I want to thank Tim for sharing his story, because his story is spread across every single person sitting here. Every person at this table in some capacity has gone through some or all, myself included, very, very much. I keep a lot of that to myself. I'm a lot more personal of a person, but every person here has in some capacity gone through that. We've all grappled with our demons. We've all sat there and overanalyzed losses and struggles, and just kind of looked out and evaluated the plane in front of us and realized that there aren't solutions, there aren't ways, and you become overcome. And you realize that there isn't a solution to this problem. You can't go rent a tool from Home Depot to fix this. You can't.
Right.
You can't go to Walmart and solve this with a torque wrench or whatever.
But whiskey helps.
Yeah. Which is so. They always tell you that you need healthy coping mechanisms, and everybody has their own different opinion of what that means. To some people at this table, drinking might be, or general.
It's St. Patty's Day.
General unprofessional camaraderie may be the correct coping mechanism. That often works, but in the long run, it can be, it's a good Band-Aid, but it can be it could be a damaging aspect. And
definitely
when
you spiral out of control.
Yeah, and when you're in charge,
I don't know why everyone's looking at me.
I'm not spiraling.
But you said you were a more personal person. And I typically am a more personal person, but just like John said when he was talking about seeing a therapist and whatnot, I also try to be open, especially with not necessarily the younger guys, but with anybody in my profession.
Yeah.
Because growing up, and when I started the fire service, it was taboo. You didn't talk about that shit.
Well, the truth is, it's no more complex, and you're just braver than me. It really just is that. You're ballsier than I am.
And I think it used to be that way, but it feels good now, because I feel like I can be that peer support advocate for somebody. Like, hey, I've gone through this.
Yeah.
We do the same job.
Well, right. And you were for me, because I had my little spat where it seemed like for no particular reason, the left side of my body stopped working.
Right.
And I had to go to an ENT, and it was weird.
You go through the whole gambit for the doctors to tell you you're okay.
Yeah, for 3 months, the whole left side of my body was tingling, and then people were like, "Are you freaking out?" I'm like, "I'm not. I don't know what's going on. Nothing particular would happen." And then when I realized it was anxiety, is when I talked to you. I'd go on a fire call, and when I was done, everything was fine. Until I was like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm supposed to be freaking out, because my mind was off of whatever it was. And that's what, Dustin said, it's not a Hollywood thing where you just have to be hyper focused on one thing. It's not.
And mine was never on the call, right? If or not even on a call, but if I was doing something, if I was actively doing something, I was fine.
Yeah.
It was that idle time. When nothing's going on, right? And then your mind starts racing.
Yeah. And I want to talk about
when you get out of focus, and all of a sudden your control mechanisms aren't there.
What in the fire service is found on the back of the tailboard of an engine. And in the military, it's found in the barracks. And when
don't talk about the barracks. You don't.
Yeah.
Nothing holy.
We don't bring up the
my barracks was different from yours because I had male and female barracks.
Well, I wasn't talking about the Super 8. I
can't even imagine how that would have functioned having females.
So what it was found was in the person that was listening to you, and maybe that was a woman to all these men. Did you disagree?
No, I completely agree. That's one of the, at the risk of getting actually burned at the stake or potentially hung in public, the female support system in the United States of America has been one of the That's a foundation of what made America strong. Well, it doesn't get enough credit. The women in this country are the backbone of the United States of America.
Well, I would agree with you.
The backbone of the nuclear family, backbone of the government.
I would
used to just be family before they called it nuclear.
To say that women are mentally superior to men.
Agreed.
Okay.
Never mind. Agreed. In fact,
not on St. Patty's Day, you're going to get me into this. Don't do it.
Here's the truth. Not to hard pivot into the 5.5 dimension, but the concept of mental health coping mechanisms was in fact patterned and designed from a woman who was a mother of 8 children. A really awesome story. I highly suggest anybody Google that information. You can talk about that.
Is
really
it in Aesop's Fables?
But while we're talking about coping mechanisms, it would probably be a good idea. I mean, we all have our different varieties of coping mechanisms, and there's no one size fits all coping mechanism. What is everybody at the table generally? Chris, what's your preferred coping mechanism?
Don't say Netflix.
Alcohol.
Say your wife.
I think just labeling it as a coping mechanism makes it sound kind of like official and ominous.
I'm going to go around the room.
Okay.
Starting at John.
Okay.
Give me some advice for somebody coming home to not feel like shit when they get home.
From the military specifically?
Yeah, from the military.
So I'm not going to give advice, but I'm going to tell you what I think would have helped me.
Okay, perfect.
Because I probably made every mistake that I could have.
You want to talk about those mistakes?
That's a cool.
I think it's kind of common. Something you commonly hear is to find your next mission when you're in the
Which
military.
sounds super cliche.
It is super cliche, but I think the message is good, and the message is don't be a lazy sack of shit and get out there and do something.
You need to have a plan.
Yeah, well, I did have a plan. It just wasn't a good plan. I definitely took the path of least resistance.
I'm not laughing at your pain. It's just funny the way you said it.
It's
wasn't a good
hey,
one.
some movies are dramas. Some movies are horror. Mine is my movie's some terrible, horrific comedy. No, I did have a plan, and I thought it was a good plan, but also it was the path of least resistance. I took the easiest way. I knew I had a job lined up. It turned out not to be very fulfilling, and it caused a lot of other problems, but so I had a plan. It wasn't a very good plan. I took the path of least resistance, had a job lined up, knew I was going to be able to go to school and get a little bit of unemployment. Financially, I was going to be able to pay my bills. The big problem with that was I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was just kind of keep staying above water. Like that's what school was more about, staying afloat financially. Cause I needed the stipend to help pay my bills, even though, like I said, I did have a job, but I wasn't making good money. And that I went down that road for a while, and before I realized like this just isn't working for me. So I don't even remember the exact series of events. I talked about it a little bit in the last podcast we did, but I did some different jobs, went into construction. I kept trying different things, which that was the one good thing that I did was when I knew something wasn't working for me, I was willing to keep trying something else. And that ultimately led me to where I am now, which is a place of general happiness and fulfillment.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, but we talked a little bit about the loss of identity, and that definitely happens. There's a culture shock too, where you could be the most well-adjusted person, but you're going from a highly organized, regimented bureaucracy, right? Like the military is a huge bureaucracy, and you're kind of always under the thumb of somebody, right? You're doing a lot of stuff. You're not doing a lot of stuff because you want to. it's not like you're motivated you're not motivated for positive reasons, right? It's always kind of under the threat of like, do this or else. And not even that. It's not even that. It's just, my experience in the military was constantly doing things to avoid pain. There was a lot of pleasure seeking over the weekends.
That's what it comes back to, I think, to being a civilian is when you get back from the field for a month and you're like, I'm going to treat myself. And then when you get home, you're like, I didn't really do much today, but I'm going to treat myself.
Right.
And then that's 6 months of treating yourself.
Right. Yeah. I guess if what I probably would have done differently is been a little more honest with myself about if my plan was going to work. And it's easy for me to say that now because hindsight's 20/20, but I probably could have came up with a different plan. I also, in a lot of ways, I isolated when I came home too. Like I was still around people, but I kind of emotionally, I isolated from people. And that ties in with what we talked about was like, I didn't relate to anybody. People didn't think the shit I thought was funny was as funny as I do.
But when you hear it, you think it's all bullshit. Oh, loss of identity. Oh, you're going to go through this. You're like, dude, I got friends and family at home. Anything's better than this. I'll figure it out.
One of the problems with what John's saying there is that the extremely well-functioning, well-lubricated, pure support system that functions in the military to keep your head above water, it also functions in the EMS environment more in the military, is also the absolute worst thing on earth for separating from the military. So John's having a good day, and I build him up.
Yeah,
John, you're huge. You're sexy. You're a man beast. Well, you're a cocksmith. But then John comes, he comes to me and that absolutely destroyed my self-esteem. He comes to me with this same plan for separation, and he gives me this really stupid idea. He says, I'm going to open 12 taco shops. I've got $750. Yeah. And obviously this is a ridiculous example. But,
dude, that's way better than my plan was.
Exactly. That's my point. But the same support system that kept John afloat, and me and you and everybody else, when it sucked, because we were sucking as a group, and nobody can really understand the holy power that's involved in sucking as a group and how much it can motivate you to keep your head above water. But, when you get out, that support system, it goes until the day you drive out of that gate. And you don't realize that. Nobody ever tells you that your friends are like, yeah, John, that's a good idea. You got $700, open up 12 taco stands. You're going to marry 2 wives. Okay. You're going to have 14 children. They're going to mow your yard for you.
And work at the taco stand.
And work at the taco stand and that sounds like the best idea on earth until the moment your tires cross that gate for the last time. And you're overcome with an overpowering sorrow.
We left El Paso. The last thing in our mind was a taco stand. But can you briefly describe what you went through when you got out?
Well, I want to make sure I didn't shortchange John's explanation because I really just wanted to piggyback and say, 1, I appreciate, and 2, I agree with them, and just give a reason why. Well, John, I don't want to shortchange John.
If you could do it over,
but I will.
If you could give advice to somebody and fast track the bullshit. I mean, is it in an individual experience, or would you give somebody advice to?
I would say just get off your dead ass and go do something.
Have a better plan.
Yeah, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to is, I'm not saying don't take time off, but one thing, to touch on what Dustin said, one thing you are not in the military is alone. You're always around people when you're at work. Maybe it's a little different if you live off post, or you have a family in a house. But if you're living in the barracks and you're like, I kind of want to do something, you just go next door and knock on your neighbor's door. And if they're not there, you go to the next one, and you got about, 20, 30 people that you can go to. And sometimes you're just doing nothing, sitting outside, just kind of doing what we're doing, just kind of BSing. So that's one thing. But give yourself some time, but put a limit on it, a week, 2 weeks, whatever, and say, okay, I've had my time to do nothing. Now I got to start making moves. And I guess just don't if I was going to give advice, I would say don't think you got to have a perfect plan. Be action oriented, which is something that you may or may not. That's something I learned in the military is like action oriented. It's like get up and go do something. And if that doesn't work out, then that's fine. Like don't sit there all month trying to think of the perfect plan. Just come up with a plan and go do it.
Yeah. I like that.
Good theory.
Yeah. What about you?
If I was to give younger me some advice, at the time I didn't know what I was going to experience. I've never been a guy who's scared of much, and that's not because I'm fearless. It's mostly because I'm dumb. But there are a few defining moments in my life where an overwhelming fear came over me. It wasn't when I went in the military. One of those times was when I left the military for certain. I wasn't scared to go to the Middle East. I wasn't scared to do deployments. I wasn't scared. I was scared the day I signed the paperwork to get married. That absolutely terrified me, all of that responsibility. And the feeling, I don't even know how to describe with words, and that's not usual for me. The feeling that overwhelmed me when I pulled out of the gate at my base for the last time was quite possibly one of the most overwhelming feelings that I've ever experienced in my life. And I have seen some stuff like you guys have. And everything just culminated to one giant exchange of energy, like one giant massive hammer blow to my chest. And I swallowed so much emotion at once, and I was not prepared for that. I had a plan. I wouldn't say I was a complete idiot. I saved money. I put money aside. I purchased a vehicle. I'd already reached out to my area for a plan for somewhere to live. I had been looking for jobs. I had been sourcing income. I'd been making a plan. I had a plan. I was getting back in school from where I left off before I went in, and I had a place I was going to go live, this, that, and the other thing. But I tell you what I wasn't prepared for. I wasn't prepared for the loss of a support system that was so overwhelming that I didn't realize that I had cultivated my entire personality, my belief structure, even, if you will. It was stronger than my religion in that support system, my friends, my peers that I served with. And when my tires crossed that gate past the guard for the last time, and I knew I was never turning around to drive back in there, I was overwhelmed with an all-encompassing sorrow that I cannot put into words. And that stayed with me for a 9-hour ride from New York all the way to my home. And I will openly admit that I wept. There was a 20-minute increment driving down the highway where I wept with a sorrow that I can't express in the English language.
Do you think you could reenact that for us?
I could.
But love overcame you.
What was that?
Love overcame you.
No, love did not overcome anything. I came home and that feeling stuck to my ribs for almost 40 days. I pushed with knowledge the military gave me. I pushed with perseverance that I had developed through a lifetime of enduring this, that, and the other thing, and war and everything else. I pushed myself. I came home, I got in school, I came home, I got a job. I pushed, go forward, one step in front of the other. And I pushed, and it never really went away. It's still there. It's still there 13 years later. It's less than it was. I still yearn for that. I still long for that. It's still in a small part is involved in my decision-making process. I'd be lying if I said it was. I'll never have that again. And the military does not do a good job of prepping you for that. So if I could give advice to the young exiting vet, I would say prep yourself for the loss of the greatest support system that you have ever had or will ever have, because you don't realize how driven you are while you're there until you leave and you lose that fuel. And then your component to drive is no longer in your engine. And all of those plans become less powerful and less involved. And then you realize that you need to seek out to those people again in order to continue to drive you. It really is a my brother's keeper situation. Thankfully, I served with a lot of people who were able to maintain contact with me and keep motivating me to drive and develop. If I could give advice, it's not about money. It's not about career planning. It's about setting up social circles and situations that keep you motivated outside of your primary source motivation and mental health control, which is your peer group, your boys in the Army, your family, your real family.
Well, what do you think about this too? That you might be somebody in the military. You know, you might be the guy. You might be the Dustin Hoptry, the high speed machine gunner, or Jerrod Senter.
I was not that.
The senior scouts gunner, right? But you might be somebody, like you might be the go-to guy, and you got a wealth of knowledge and experience. And then outside the military, you got jack shit.
That's such a powerful statement.
And the other side of that coin is you got to get it through your head that nobody owes you anything. Because that's one thing that I'm kind of embarrassed to admit, but you do sometimes walk around feeling like people kind of owe you. And then it took me 10 years to figure out, it's like, these people don't know me from Adam, and they don't give a shit.
Yeah,
and guess what? They don't have to. That's fine.
It's like the all-star high school athlete.
Yeah.
You know,
the air on top of that mountain is intoxicating.
Yeah.
But it's an addictive intoxication.
If you look at
So one of the things I would like to, one of the things that in the context of what advice would you give the exiting U.S. soldier, Marine, sailor, airman? The military has a pretty extensive exit process. It teaches you about a lot of things. What it doesn't teach you about is the mental and emotional withdrawal process of being separated from such a support system that you take for granted while you're in the military. And the detriment of losing that system can become overwhelmingly encompassing in your motivation. It can. And the day before you leave the military, you have all these plans, you have all this drive, you have all this motivation. And on the drive home, it's been the experience of most people that I know that you lose almost all of it before you even get home, and you pull your vehicle, or that bus pulls into the bus stop, or you pull your truck or car into the driveway of where you're going to live. You lose all of that. And you don't even exit your vehicle for the first time before you lose all of that drive and motivation, and you realize that you're hopeless, you're lost. You don't have that support system. So the advice that I would give would be to strengthen yourself as your support system. Don't just plan for your monetary gain. Don't just plan for your career. Don't just plan for your education development or where you're going to work, but strengthen yourself and realize that you have a weakness that the military trains into you. And it's that they always tell you that we're teaching you to work as a team, but what they don't teach you is after they teach you to work as a team, nobody teaches you how to not work as a team. And when you don't have that team anymore, it carves a portion of your heart out of you, and you fall apart until you learn how to heal yourself. And that healing process, nobody prepares you for that. Nobody teaches you how to endure for that. And many vets exit the military on their own, and there absolutely isn't a system to consume or encompass or treat that. And that's the real root reason why a veteran kills themselves every 2 or 3 minutes. That's the real root reason why that happens. It's because you're taught how to only work on a team. It's not because you're taught to command or follow orders or action or combat or this. You're taught to be part of a team. You're taught to be part of a higher purpose. And that higher purpose becomes your soul. That's your purpose. That's your driving equity. And then it's taken from you. It's robbed from you. You're kicked out of that nest. You're deprived of that family, that energy, that essence. And you don't realize how much that energy or essence drives you. And without that, you become a husk. You become dried up. You're trying to sustain in a dead, arid land. It's cold. Eventually you reach a point where you can't sustain anymore.
What's the upside? Because
the upside of separation. What you just said
depressed the ever living shit out of me.
I apologize.
I'm almost crying right now.
I will hug all of you.
I'm a fucking husk.
What's the upside?
The upside of separation?
You could do whatever you want.
Yes, you get the opportunity to cultivate
somebody's form and setup. Yeah,
we are. We're the upside. Look, we made it. Okay, we're the statistical anomaly that made it. Sitting here at this table, we are a different type of brotherhood. Mm-hmm. Okay, which is another piece of advice I would seek. There's brotherhood outside of the military, just like there's brotherhood outside of the EMS and fire service. We made it. Okay, here's a table of people with varying opinions and lifestyles and thought processes, and we may not agree politically, emotionally, physically. We may not even be attracted to the same specimens in the human genus.
Species.
The same species, if you will. But at the end of the day,
Thank you for being all inclusive.
yes, if Chris calls me at 2:47 a.m. tonight, says I got a flat tire, bro, I'm gonna be there.
Appreciate you.
So I have a system. I have a support group, and getting out without cultivate that before you leave. That would be my best piece of advice. Cultivate that with your good, trustworthy friends. In the last podcast, we talked about, what'd you call them? Good people, good dudes, or
Good dudes.
that.
Yeah, we were calling them out.
Find that. That's a lot harder to find.
Be that.
Yeah, be that.
Yeah, be that, cultivate that. That's a lot harder to find outside of the military than it is in the military.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody in the military is there because they have, at least in a small capacity, a sense of duty and honor. That's a lot more rare outside of the military. Find that, cultivate that, surround yourself with that. You'll figure out money, you'll figure out schooling, you'll figure out a career. But if you don't have that, at least 2 or 3 of those in your life, you will sink in quicksand.
There's I don't know how many other red-pilled people there are out here that listen to Jordan Peterson, but one of the quotes he has is, find the person you want to be and then aim single-mindedly at that, which is interpreted however you want it, but that seems like the best advice for me.
I think it's good that you brought that up because we just kind of it's all been doom and gloom and all the horrible.
It's fucking St. Patty's Day. We need to be happy.
But there's undeniably, there are good things about being in the military. The social system is one thing, but also just knowing that you can do some hard shit, right? Like,
for sure.
There's been,
You'd be a tough dude.
Hey, I don't want to be homeless, but if I had to, I could do it.
Yep.
It's all good till you lose that poncho.
Yeah, right. But there's something to be said for knowing if I break down and nobody stops to help me, I can walk 10 miles to the next gas station because I've done it 100 times. Or just the get it done culture, right? Like I talked about Lonnie. One of his famous sayings was,
Steel.
There's nothing you can't do with 10 motherfuckers and a hammer.
That statement permeates the entire military, by the way. Yeah.
So I'll tell, if we have time, a little funny side story.
No time in the world.
So when I tell people about my first sergeant, this is one story that I tell, probably the story that I tell. When we were deployed, we were on a COP, which is a smaller forward base. At the time I was there, it was not as remote as some, but there wasn't, like, we had to have water trucked in, like there wasn't running water, and we were still burning shit and stuff like that. But we had a shower, and they would truck in water for the showers. And one morning, we were out late at night on patrol, and we get back, we're sleeping, and I think our next day was like an off day. We were on like force protection or QRF or something. And it, like, first light, probably 6 o'clock in the morning, the door comes flying open, and he's just like, give me 12. We're building a shower. And we're just like, we have a shower. Why are we building a shower? And we kind of like stumble out of bed and walk to the front door, and the whole fucking shower is already taken down. It's at like 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm telling you, this dude was probably at it at 4 o'clock. In one day, we built a whole new shower stall system setup, whatever it was. And we also built many other things, a deck for some reason. But so one thing that he would always say, and I think this ties in with what we were talking about narrow focus, right? You said, what was the Jordan Peterson thing? Aim single.
Find out who you want to be and aim single-mindedly at that.
So the one thing that my first sergeant would always say is, he's like, you don't have to do 1,000 things or 100 things or 10 things. He said, you have to find the one thing that you need to do and do that with all your energy. And then when that's done, you find the next thing and then you do that. And then the next thing and then the next thing. And that's something that stuck with me because there's a lot of power in that. Like, you're capable of probably more than you think if you can just
finish one thing.
Yeah. Put your, instead of trying to tackle 10 things at once, just find the one thing that you want to do or the one person that you want to be and put all your energy into that.
Yeah. He was already hip to the game before anybody even knew who JP was.
And I think the flip side of that is figure out the stuff that's keeping you from that and get it out of your life. You know, that comes in with getting out of your own way.
I had to say I've done a great deal of work processing the many things that I've dealt with and PTSD and this and the other thing. And I thought I had a pretty good grip or handle on it until John just said, First Sergeant came in at the crack of dawn and said, give me 12. And like the Manchurian candidate.
Give me 12.
That feeling just came back to me and I was like, oh,
you know what I thought of?
Overcome with rage.
Give me 12 for what? Give me 11.
We need to push a Humvee for 6 miles because we don't want to put gas in it. Yeah.
So when we were building the deck, which was not the shower. Oh, I'm sorry. It wasn't a deck. It was a hooch because they sent us
a place to sleep.
I thought that was toilet wine.
So a hooch would be plywood structure to sleep in.
Did you guys ever make toilet wine in Afghanistan?
No.
Okay.
You didn't need to make toilet wine because you could purchase whiskey in a can if you knew the right type of guy.
Okay.
You may find this hard to believe, but I was pretty square when it came. Like, I was a big rule follower.
So was I.
Yeah.
No, not you.
But they sent us, we had a civil affairs team and one of the team members was a female. And at that time there were no females on the base.
Was she Union or Confederate? No, not Civil War. Sorry.
Yeah. So we had to build her own sleeping quarters because there was nowhere for her to sleep and they weren't going to put her with a bunch of dudes who haven't seen a woman in 7 months.
Interesting.
So we're building this thing and we had a unit out on patrol and somebody just comes up and goes, hey, Top, they're taking pop shots. And he's like basically he's saying like the patrol's out, they're taking fire. It doesn't sound like they're being ambushed, but somebody's shooting at them. And the first sergeant just goes, I need you to tell me what you're saying. He said, are they in contact right now or not? And the NCO just goes, in contact means like, are they actively engaged with the enemy? And he says, well, they're not in contact, but they're taking harassing fire. And the first sergeant just goes, Repp, hand me that fucking long piece right there. And goes right back to hammering. No, like he did not give a fuck.
I only got to 2 people when I was moving around the room. I want you to give advice to somebody who may be kind of the same concept, like fast tracking somebody's mental state to where they're maybe experiencing like a delayed burnout, and something positive you would say instead of it's only going to get worse before it gets worse.
Before he does that, should we define in our opinion what a burnout is?
Well, we kind of did a little bit, but I think it's kind of subjective, but I
think it's definitely subjective.
What do you think, Tim? Like, what's your opinion of a burnout? I would say it's when you reach the point where you can't control it or govern it anymore.
It's hard to say because I don't believe I'm burnout.
For sure.
I have my opinions on what I think people, others that are burnout and whatnot.
Yeah. You may not realize this, but your driving personality actually drives a lot of people around you.
And I hope to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm experiencing kind of that situation right now with my current employer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think that the other individuals that aren't on board yet, I don't think they're burnout per se, but
yeah.
I don't know how to approach it as far as to get them on board with the way shit needs to be done.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The only reason
you've worked with people that in your opinion were burnout.
Yeah.
For sure.
Sure.
They're just negative about everything.
Would you say just a loss of empathy?
I think so, but that's also hard because, I mean, you could say somebody doesn't have empathy, but if there's one certain situation, you find out that they are empathetic towards one thing. I don't think they're completely just fucking walled off.
Maybe just like not appropriately empathic.
Yeah, and maybe it's a shell or a facade that they're just they think it's cool to be burnt out. I don't know.
That seems like a thing where being like the salty.
Yeah. They want to be salty. They think it's fucking cool. Whatever. I don't know.
Yeah, but see, listen, there's an upside and a downside to that depending on how you play it. I'll personally give two examples. I get into a long-winded story here about how I was angry. I come out of a really crummy political situation, not going to name names, dealing with some funding issues, grant issues, this and everything. And I actually remember being over at this location. I won't name this location. And other people's motivation can often drive you. Tim, I'm not going to say anybody's human, but Tim is always around me, had like almost a gift, if you will, for making sure.
I am gifted.
He's gifted.
Special people.
He makes sure. Tim is either really good at making sure that his lack of motivation is not worn on his sleeve, or he sacrifices himself to make sure that other people stay motivated, because I've done a lot of crazy stuff in my time, but I've come over to this location and been unmotivated before, and we work in the same industry. And Tim, who from time to time deals with way more nonsense than I do sometimes, has remotivated me, even though he's been in the midst of his own struggles, which is a crazy thing. I don't know how to define that or describe that, personality trait of a person, but that's kind of a thing that Tim has. Not that he's responsible for being that way or that he owes that to me or anybody else, but that's kind of just a crazy cool thing that certain people, rare people in this industry have. And Tim's one of those people.
False motivation.
Yeah, he's like
no motivation.
Fount of driving motivation. Yeah. You're a special person, Tim.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So since we've already established that Tim
is unmotivated.
That you're presumably not burnout. You don't think you're burnout.
No,
and I don't think we think that you are.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like maybe Jerrod's asking, like, if you're going to give somebody advice,
preventative maintenance.
Yeah, like what
maintenance.
What helped you that might help somebody else?
For sure. That's a good question.
And I tell you what, I haven't always lived this in my professional career, but I would say try to get better every day. Learn whether it's learning something new about your job or working out or eating better, because I lived in the slum for a long fucking time. And I started eating better and started working out, and I feel better. I feel like a better person, but I mean, I don't know, just try to be a better person and try to be the best version that you can be every day, because I see people that maybe think that they're burnout, or where that they have the burnout imposter, if you will, like they try to be salty or whatever, but they haven't. I mean, I'm not going to say they haven't seen shit, but they haven't been.
If you would have heard somebody say this, would that be enough to start working out and eating better? Or do you have to just experience it? Because
I mean, I definitely experienced it. I let myself go, and you feel like shit. And I'm not even talking about the whole mental health anxiety thing, and that it does play a part into it, but you feel like shit. You show up to work, you do your calls, you do your job, whatever, but you're not being a part of the team. You're not being a good part of the team. You're being dead weight, and that, especially in our line of work, that's no way to be. You
can be kind of like, the way I look at it is you're either adding value, subtracting value, or you're kind of neutral.
Yep.
And it's like,
That raises an interesting question. What John's saying there. How much do each one of us feel that we are personally responsible for our brother or our partner at work and their mental health condition? It's another. You could talk another 10 hours about the shortcomings of that.
It's still.
How responsible am I for Tim's mental health?
I don't know if John said it, but like, you might see things, right? And they might not be aware. Not even that they're not aware, but they don't know how to express it. But you see things, right? And you don't know how to approach somebody about that. You don't want to get into their Kool-Aid, so to speak.
Yeah, well,
you don't want to be dipping in their Kool-Aid and be like, hey, dude.
Well, I also see some people that are like, I'm glad I don't have to deal with this mental health thing. And then they go home and they scream at their kids.
Yeah.
And their wife.
Right.
And they don't realize they're wrapped up in the middle of it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And I think a lot of people, like for me, like I was saying, I think some people are oblivious.
Right.
To.
Well, because they went on that call and they're like, well, cool. I got through that and that didn't seem that bad.
Right.
And then it's a trickle down effect and they don't realize that they're deep in the weeds.
Well,
let me ask you though, is it more than see something, say something? Like if I see you struggling, should I just acknowledge you're struggling and tell you, or should I take responsibility and try to actively interact in your life to help you?
It's hard to, based on everybody's individual personality.
Now,
it's hard.
Now there are some instances where I do draw the line. Like if somebody says the right words or does something
for sure
that I think that heighten it to a more than
like a dangerous level,
level. Like, and I've experienced that
for sure.
And
self-harm or hurting somebody else.
Yeah. And it wasn't like imminent. It was more like a joke or something like that.
Like it's about to boil over and you can tell.
Exactly. So, and I was going to ask Dustin, because he was kind of in the military, so to speak, before shit hit the fan, and then during and after, whatever.
Barely. Yeah.
Do you think that the military as a whole knew that there was a problem while you were in, like with PTSD and stuff, or was it after? Like, did they know there was a problem? Because you talk about Jerrod and Repp, there's resources and whatnot, but. Like, or was it like, all right, we're sending these guys home and now there's a problem?
I think the military is really good at one thing, and it's goal orientation. It's mission focus and doing whatever is necessary in order to achieve that goal, which is a purpose of the military. I don't want to nag on that or say they're really good at that. As far as other militaries go compared to ours, I think we've done an okay, not great, not phenomenal, but an okay job at adapting to the common language or common understanding of mental health crises or emergencies. It took a little longer than it probably should have. I'm not a mental health specialist, so preface this by saying I'm not qualified to assess that adaptation correctly, but I think the military did what they had to do, and then I think they a little slow, but did care enough after the fact to try to pick up the pieces. Now, the implementation of those processes may have been choppy. Absolutely. You could define it differently. But I think that when they realized it was not cost effective, number one, that's their primary priority. It wasn't cost effective to leave vets out in the wind with no mental health support, just like no physical or medical support. They began to adapt systems because it wasn't cost effective to leave them, without any support system. And then there's the equation of human value. And when they, you began to get better people into the healthcare systems. And when better people came into the healthcare systems, they began to equate the human equity, the human value of the individual person higher. And once those people became part of the systems, more and more adopted into the pre-separation, the post-separation, like into the VA healthcare systems for mental health. The system itself is still defunct from top to bottom, in my opinion, as a professional, because it focused primarily on risk mitigation or liability mitigation instead of the individual person's solution. But it is infinitely better today than it was in 2000. is infinitely better today than it was in 2000. Any progress is progress, and they are moving. Every year they do get better, and better people become involved in those systems, and better physicians and evaluators become involved in those systems. It's not a perfect system, but it is a system that I can truthfully say is trying to improve itself. We may not all agree with the rate or the capacity in which it's improving itself, but it is trying to improve itself. And hopefully in some capacity, we will reach the standard that some other countries' militaries have, in taking care of veterans, and preventative maintenance of mental health is the biggest misnomer in our country. After maintenance or after repair of mental health is something that our country does a good job of focusing on, but preventative maintenance of mental health deficiencies is not something that we focus on, and we really need to prioritize that better.
Well, how do you prevent? So, like being in a war zone, right?
Sure.
How do you prevent that? I mean, isn't there collateral damage that just has to take place?
Absolutely.
Especially with fire and EMS. Like, if you want to, in my mind, if you're going to prevent all that stuff, you don't go on the calls, right?
For sure.
You don't see the shit.
Yeah.
And even like I've heard in some fire schools, I'm not going to name any names, but one of the instructors said, "Oh, you hear a bad," and this is strictly for volunteers, but you hear a bad call come over the radio, you just crack a beer, you drink it, and you don't go on the call.
For sure.
And that's fucking bullshit.
I hesitate to use the term, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs, because the eggs are human lives and emotions and souls and hearts and experiences. And the weight behind that is immense and incalculable. The military serves a purpose.
Sure.
That purpose has to be achieved. And at the end of the day, we are, to a capacity, as equally responsible for our mental health as the entity that we choose to join is responsible for our mental health. We did make the decision. So the common sense answer to that wide brushstroke of a question is this: you did choose to join the military, just like you chose to join the law enforcement, the EMS, the fire, the safety services community. With that is an assessed and known, well-evaluated, well-established risk. That risk is not just on your physical person, but it's on your emotional, mental person. Right. Now, you know that capacitance exists, and you assess that risk and you take that risk upon yourself, and you know that you will be damaged. You know that you will be damaged. You make the decision to defend your child against a bully, you may be damaged. You make the decision to defend your home against an intruder, you may be damaged. You make the decision to defend your wife against an attacker or a thief or a robber, you may be damaged. You take upon that assessment to a capacity when you join that. And the military is no different, just like EMS and fire is no different. There's a risk assessment involved in that decision. So you are yourself wholly responsible for a large capacity of your mental health maintenance. But the military is also responsible as they choose your mission orientation and function, and where they will apply that effective use of force and application of your capacity to a degree as well. So I would say, I don't know what the percentage accurately is, but I would say that the decider to participate in that process or mission is just as culpable for their mental health and responsible for it as the entity that is commanding, directing, and controlling them is. Christopher.
Yes, sir.
As a medic firefighter, how personally responsible do you feel for mine? Well, let's not say me, because we're friends. Okay. We're friends. We have an established relationship. How personally responsible do you feel for your given everyday coworkers' mental health?
I do feel like you have, some kind of responsibility, but I think it's more complicated than just the whole, like Tim's saying, say something is like the whole given phrase most of the time, but everybody deals with their stuff differently. So if you see somebody act in a certain way that you think is they might be going through something, then somebody else might not act that way, and they might kind of hide their symptoms maybe a little better or cope a little differently. So it's probably, I think that it's more complicated than just seeing something, say something, because everybody does things a little different. Everybody copes stuff differently and has their mechanisms, and they try to hide their whatever symptom you might have differently than everybody else probably does. So I don't know how to take somebody's situation, and I don't know how to start that conversation with somebody, first of all.
I feel like you actually have to know them for a while.
Yeah. I think you got to be able to know how somebody is and know them well enough to know when they're acting off or when they're, I guess, showing those signs and symptoms.
I kind of curtailed this question around you, and I'll tell you why. You're an empathetic person, okay? And some people at this table, myself, I'll take the heat on that. Not very good at empathy, okay? You are a truly kind, generous human who I have seen exhibit extremely high equities and just being a good human in general.
Do what I can.
Well, if you could change one thing about mental health and how it's handled or managed or viewed in EMS and fire, what's your opinion? What would you change? If you had governance over that, what would you do?
I guess probably make it easier to talk about, because like everybody here has said that it's kind of a negative stigma around it, like a sign of weakness almost to talk about if you have some problems going on mentally. But I think we're kind of starting to move down the path of that it's not really a weakness, and everybody's kind of got something going on. It's just kind of how you deal with it. And it's whether you just talk to the guys at work, you like the station, talk to all the guys at work, or whether you have to have an actual professional that you sit down with on some kind of regular basis that you go and see somewhere. It just kind of depends on how you deal with it. But I think not viewing mental health as a negative all around is probably a step in the right direction. I think that's kind of what we're seeing. I think we're going down that path right now, but it's still, I think, in the pretty early stages of that.
If I was struggling, would you take responsibility for me?
Partially.
That's really where it starts.
Yeah.
That's really where it starts, right? The old saying of my brother's keeper. I mean,
right.
That in both the military and in public safety in its various capacities, I mean, that's always been the issue. Who is weaker, the person suffering or the person who refuses to take responsibility for the person suffering? I mean, at what point in time, do I take on the responsibility? If Christopher's suffering, do I take on the responsibility of Chris? Am I my brother's keeper? Am I weak for taking on your suffering and trying to hold your shoulders up and your head above water? Am I weak for that? I mean, there's just as much psychological and emotional conditioning in EMS and fire and public safety to say that I should ignore you. You are the weak link. I've seen that my entire life. Yeah. You know, the guy who's been around for 15, 18, 20 years or so, and he has that pediatric call that was the straw that broke the camel's back this week. And it's not to say that he's broken for the rest of his career, but he's about to have a tough week or a tough month. He's overwhelmed with weight at home with his wife, his children, school, a whole host, the insane capacities of maintaining our job and education. And he is going to break. But so much in our industry says that guy, that I'll say me, I'll define myself as that. Dustin is weak. He's now the weak link on the department. Okay. And there's such a system in place almost, if you will, that says shun him. Don't help him. Don't be a part of that. How do we make that turn? How do we come around the curb as an industry? I mean everything, with our unions, with our political systems, with our funding systems, with our internal peer support systems, our training systems. That's a lot. That's a big question. How do we make a turn to where we stop shunning that person as a weak link, but instead go and then evaluate the failures in that person, if you will, not to call them failures, but the weak points, and build them back up. Give to Christopher of what is strong in Dustin. Give your weaknesses my strength and build you back up. How do we make that turn, in your opinion?
I feel like I don't know, like we said before, it's just kind of understanding that when you have something going on, that it's not a weakness, it's just how you're going to deal with it. It's just kind of something that you're going to have to overcome at some point. So yeah. I think that the first part is just recognizing in yourself that you're not really good in a good place. And then you have to talk to somebody about it, whether you talk to your family at home or whether you talk to the guys at work or who you're riding the medic with that day or whoever it may be that you feel comfortable with, or whether it's a therapist that you talk to, whoever it may be, and then just kind of move down the line from there. And I'm pretty fortunate. The department that I work for, we have like a dedicated member support unit for our guys that we work with. It's its own building, it's its own place. You can go there, talk to somebody that you want to talk to. Everything's confidential there. That's something that just started recently within the past year.
Year of our Lord 2023.
Yeah, in the year of all things holy.
What you're saying reminds me of a statement that I've heard. I hate using the term toxic because it's just such a gross term. And modern times, toxic. Ugh, grossing me out. But how toxic is it when you hear the person say, I dealt with that. They'll be fine. Isn't that such a thought process that permeates our industry?
Definitely.
Christopher will be fine. I dealt with that.
Yeah, I dealt with it. It's no big deal.
He should be fine. He shouldn't have an issue.
Right.
I mean, what an assumption. What assumption.
Yeah, because then if you already dealt with it, then you should realize how bad of a spot it is to be in.
They probably need to talk to somebody themselves.
Yeah. You should be even more empathetic to that person if you already went through it.
There's a difference between saying it and kind of meaning it.
Yeah.
Right? I think you got to be real careful though with the whole being your brother's keeper. And what I mean is don't ask if you feel like somebody's a little off and you just, hey, is everything good? People have asked me.
For sure.
And sometimes it's like, I'm good. I don't know why. I just don't have much to say today. Because you guys probably know I usually got a lot to say. So if I come in and I don't have anything to say, people are like, what's up with you? It's like, nothing, man. I just don't have much to say today. But there are also people who, for various reasons, just can't help. They can't be helped, or they don't want help, or they can't be honest with themselves. And I've personally seen people who were kind of given every opportunity and every resource and still just were unable to be honest with themselves about the situation they were in.
And we've done a lot of cliches, but like, when do they get to the point where they want to help themselves? Like, they want to be better at some point. I know it's hard, but like, at what point do you say, like, dude, stop calling me unless next time you call me, change something. One thing, 1% of your life, change 1% of your life. You know what I mean?
Make some progress.
Yes.
Something. Yeah.
Well, I think another thing that we have to realize is that when we're talking about mental illness, which it could be PTSD, depression, anxiety, OCD, addiction, it could be a bunch of stuff. Like, you're dealing with people who are not well. So sometimes it's kind of like people who are addicted to drugs, and you're like, well, I don't know why they don't just stop doing drugs. It's like, well, maybe, and I'm not going to open up that can of worms, but maybe it's not that simple for them.
Well, yeah, it's like somebody going through a panic attack and telling them, just calm down.
Right.
It's not really that simple.
But you can, in my opinion, I don't feel like, I feel like if I'm willing to help, but also I don't feel like I don't feel like you're my responsibility, right? That doesn't mean that I'm not going to be concerned, or maybe I might talk to you or say something, but mainly I view it as like, I'm here if you need me, or I might tell somebody like, hey, I kind of think you're fucking up here. Like if somebody, I'll just give a purely hypothetical. If somebody came to work, clearly they stayed out too late and they kind of still smell like booze, I might be like, is everything, I probably wouldn't do it at that time, but after I bet the fact, like, everything good? I'm like, yeah, why? And I would tell them, be like, this is not like you. This sudden change in behavior, right? That's what I would look for. It's like, oh, this is not like you. And also this could be potentially serious, like this is something that could cost you your job. So is there anything you can do?
One of the things about what you said really hits home, but I want to challenge you. I want to challenge your statement about not taking personal responsibility. And I'm going to do this in a silly way, because I personally know that if anybody ever asks you for help, you'd be the first person in line. You'd be the absolute first person in line to help them.
John picked me up from McDonald's.
Right. But
sorry, that was an actual story.
Just to be facetious, it can become mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausting taking responsibility for people, for humans. But one of the things that I find interesting about the EMS and fire and police industry in its specific capacity is that the vast majority of us joined this industry to take responsibility for other people, to help other people, to be the solution to somebody's problem in their time of need, in their worst situation, to train, to educate, to be the solution to that problem.
Let me cut you off.
Yeah.
Before I forget, that's what I wanted to talk about. And I think me and John kind of talked about it in our last episode, is we have all this, we're talking about all this mental health stuff. What kind of person joins? Where is their mental state at before they subject themselves to this stuff?
To EMS and fire specifically, or military?
Both.
Let's talk about the majority, because there's definitely other people that join this profession.
For sure. There's a hero.
For the wrong fucking reason.
There's a hero people. There's a t-shirt.
Exactly.
I want a fire department. I want to be a hero.
Sticker club.
I want John to buy me a beer.
And I talked about it earlier. Like, some people want, I'm going to say this because I mean it. Some people want to have other people think they have PTSD. That's just it. There's a million TikToks of it. What? There's a million TikToks.
Wait, can you say that again?
So it's these. Let me define that.
I work 47 fucking days straight.
Yes.
There's people that want people to think.
Yeah.
There's people that want people to think they have PTSD.
Yeah.
They get a TikTok account.
Yep.
They join their local police department. They put on their Kevlar. They look in the mirror. They have 5-finger death punch in the background.
Toby Keith.
And they're crying. And that is why people that really need help.
12 thin blue line flags.
Yeah,
on the back of their truck.
they're the same people that say, "Hey, I'm in it. We're not here to save people. We're here to take time off and hang with the boys."
Yes.
So
Let me put it in
that person, that entity is one of the most toxic permeations in our industry.
I want to talk about them, and I want to talk about the people that, like us, there is a certain person in a certain headspace that has no other.
Yep.
They feel like they have no other options, or they're like, this is just what I have to do. I feel like they're already predisposed to be, especially once we leave the brotherhood we're talking about.
Yeah.
That's 90% of the reason you join this stuff.
I'll tell you what that person is. That person is the hot dog in the spaghetti that somebody made for you. Like you're like, oh, spaghetti, and then you find out it's got hot dogs in it, and you're like, what
Not
the fuck
spaghetti,
is this?
yeah.
Not spaghetti.
But spaghetti.
So that person came for all the wrong reasons, emotionally, physically, mentally, and that person that you're describing, that person that has the "I fight with you" fear sticker.
That's why they call me.
That person that says has the respect all cops on the back of their thing. That person who says you respect my authority. That person
All
hurts.
glory, no guts.
Yes.
That person hurts.
I'm telling you what,
us.
these smoke eaters.
Let's talk about. So I think that we have all experienced some type of, I don't want to call it a mental crisis, but some type of.
We've experienced life.
We've experienced life, right?
Yeah, the day Jerrod was born was life.
In the shoes of someone else that the normal person has not.
For sure.
Because we've experienced death. We've experienced.
We're better than them.
Right.
We have daily stressors that other people can't understand.
Exactly. Yeah. So how do we deal with it? Or what have you found, except for Chris here that hasn't experienced anything?
That's true of me.
Except that he doesn't know that he's experienced anything. Anyway, how do you guys deal with it?
I want to throw something out that's more of a concept, but I feel like we've all, and this is something that I know Chris can relate to, because we've been talking a lot about kind of serious trauma and it's all blood and guts. But I think a lot of what wears on people, especially when you're talking about burnout, I don't feel that affected by traumatic calls and traumatic experiences. I'm not saying I'm not affected. What I feel affected by is the relentless kind of pounding that sometimes you take. Like, it's not the bad calls, it's all the other calls, like the bullshit nursing home calls,
the bullshit piling up
at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah, I get that.
And you got training in the morning and training in the afternoon, and you got to go on calls, and you're eating dinner late. The department I work at we train a lot, but it's pretty reasonable. But I see it we just had a class the other day that was a 7-hour class on a duty day.
Okay.
Right. And that's part of the job.
Sure.
It is. But when you have a day like that, and it's like, well, you still got to figure out dinner,
right.
You still got to go on calls.
You do all your daily shit.
And then on top of that, you might catch a job at 2:00 in the morning. You might insert, fill in the blank here.
You say Jobtown, I'm turning this off.
No.
Yeah. If we go to Jobtown, that means it's a fire.
But and I guess how this ties in is it's not all PTSD. I mean, everyone experiences post-traumatic stress. I think PTSD is more of when that stress hangs around a little longer than it should, and it starts to affect your life. But also, and this comes into the daily stressors, it's how you deal with stuff on a day-to-day basis and how it accumulates over time. And this will circle back to your question, but like when I talk about therapy, right? I don't talk about blood and guts shit in therapy. And honestly, I don't think I ever have. Like, I've talked about it. Now, what I have found is how some of those experiences affect me in my day-to-day life. But I talk about shit like just taking out the trash, like shit that just bothers me. And it's like, sometimes it's like, I'm kind of embarrassed about stuff that gets under my skin, but I know if there's something on my mind, it's like, there's something more here. So I'm going to bring it up.
To John's point.
What was his point?
The point is what goes home, what happens when you go home and you're at 99%. Okay. And John had taken the time to talk about how in therapy, which whether we want to admit this or not, a lot of us have done in some capacity, myself included. It's really awesome that he admitted that. I've also done some of that myself. Thank you for sharing your experience with that.
You're welcome.
It's not often that you go in and you're like, oh, the dying kid or the burning house or the whatever. It's the 1%, the 1.5% when you went home and you were at 99% already.
99% of what?
You were overwhelmed. You're in
the red. They would say you're in the red.
Your cup or bowl, if you will.
We're tapped out.
Yeah, you're at the maximum of your gauge, and you go home and you spend time talking with whatever your access to therapy is, whether it's your wife, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a coworker, whether it's your leadership. I'm a math writer.
Or just your family wants you to interact with them in some way.
That is the worst.
In some capacity. And
you carry that shit home.
Yeah. And how listen, this is my humble opinion as a fellow dirtbag in the career of dirtbags.
Yeah.
Okay. This is, if ever there is a reason why I feel responsible for John or Tim or Jerrod or Chris or Mike or anybody who is my brother or not my brother, it's that reason right there. Not because I'm a licensed therapist, not because I know what I'm doing in any way, shape, or form, because I don't. I am just as ignorant as anybody out there. But I hope that in my time of weakness, my time of need, that somebody is there when I clock out and walk out of that door at 99.9%. Because I live in fear of going home at 99.9% and that garbage bag is empty and I that's it. And I don't know what that means. Is that the last day I walk on earth? Is that the last patient I help? Is that the end of my marriage? Is that the day I crash my car? Is it, do I make it through that day? Do I live to the next day? I don't know. I don't know what that means. I've been close to that. We all have, and it's a hard to define example, but John's statement was extremely powerful, whether he meant it to be or not, where he goes to his therapist and he talks about he's frustrated with the garbage, or he's frustrated with, there's so much weight behind that statement. I don't think I've ever understood a statement more efficably or more powerfully than what he just said. And I know we had some goofing around, and that statement is almost tattooed on my bones. I have gone home at 99.9% and had no entity, no force, no spirituality. You can talk about spirituality, your brotherhood, or support systems all day long until you go home at 99.9% and something isn't the way it's supposed to be. And to make a joke, your cup runneth over, and your cup, for us, your cup doesn't just runneth over in a normal way. We're not carpenters. We're not mechanics. We're not roofers. We're not daycare people. When our cup runneth over, it runneth over with the worst of humanity. It runneth over with the worst of experiences, with the absolute pinnacle of suffering that humanity is capable of doling out, the best and the worst of everything. When we run over, everything around us is destroyed.
Yeah, it's not turning water into wine. It's turning a 30 rack into domestic violence.
My God,
exactly.
In
a capacity, it can't do that.
It takes a strong person at home.
Yeah.
Even though they can't relate, I don't expect my wife to.
Our wives are so awesome. They are the best.
I love them.
I don't expect them to understand what we're going through, but kind of like what Mike said, telling us that it's okay and, reassuring us or whatever, that helps. Even though they have no freaking clue what we just were involved in.
It's immense.
Let me get a closing statement from everyone. John, go first.
All right. Closing statement from me is, if you think you have a problem, if you think you're sad, if you think you have PTSD, if you might be suicidal, if you think you drink too much, got a problem with drugs, gambling, porn, whatever, talk to a professional.
Wait, porn is a problem?
It could be.
Okay.
Not for everybody.
Okay.
Excessive use.
Dustin. Thanks, John.
All right. I've had a lot of leadership capacities in my time, and I'm going to say this as a leader, as an advanced leader. Yeah, there you go. If you are a leader and you see mental health treatment as a weakness, you are a weak leader. Come see me. I will course correct you.
Come see me.
If you have a problem, if you have a problem with your people, your workforce, your manpower coming to you or your chain of command for help, come see me. I will sort you out. You are a weak leader. That's what I would put out. We are failing 100% as public safety officials to assist and ascribe mental health capacities to our people. We absolutely can do better. We can do better. I can do better. We can do better. We need to do better.
Thank you. Tim. Hula, by the way.
For me or for Dustin?
Go ahead.
Okay, because, we don't say that in the fire service. Anyway, I would just say it's not taboo anymore. Talk to somebody. If you're going through a hard time, get some help. Take care of yourself. Be fit to do the job mentally and physically. Don't fall into the slum, which I did. Definitely did. Reach out to people. Make sure that your crew is good to go. Don't be a dirtbag.
Do better.
Yeah, do better. You don't have to be the best person there, but be the best that you can be.
We need to hold ourselves to a standard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Be better.
Cool.
Be better as a person and be the best you can be at your job is what I have to say.
I like it. Mike.
So I would use a biblical reference.
John 3:16.
You would.
John Repp 316. Here we go. John, hell yeah. Oh yeah.
Go ahead, Tofig. Go ahead.
I would say just go do your job with a positive attitude. If you come to work every day and you think you're going to ride the medic and just have a horrible time, then you're probably going to. But if you go to work with a positive attitude and you're like, I'm probably going to take 25 calls today, but I'm going to have a good time doing it, then you're going to. It's fine. Go somewhere that, you have a good crew, you fit in with guys well, and just have a good time because it is the greatest job ever. And just
Exactly.
have a fun
Best
time
job
doing
in the
it.
world.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
It's the best job in the world.
Yeah, and you're going
Best
to have
job
bad
in the
days
world.
there, but
You'll have
can make
the
it a great
best
time.
days there at the same time.
You'll have the best days there. It'll be
Our worst days are better than people's best days.
exactly. Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but
Chris, I came here for you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I love you.
big city.
All right, guys. Thank you for being on episode 13, St. Patrick's
Yes,
Day.
That's 13.
I appreciate all your insight. And if this episode depressed you, it should have. So
Turn my bass up in my left ear.
turn my headphones up. Bye, everybody.
Later.